Your oversized sweaters and your pathetic freelance coding will absolutely embarrass us. Thaddeus expects elite company, and you simply do not belong here tonight, Stella. That was the vicious threat my own mother hissed at me on the evening of December 22nd. She handed me a cheap prepaid debit card and ordered me to go hide in a rundown motel so my golden child brother and his wealthy in-laws could enjoy the family estate without my humiliating presence. She had absolutely no idea that 24 hours later, she would be staring at a television screen, watching me destroy everything her precious son ever worked for on live national television. Thank you for watching this video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Stella. I am 55 years old, and for exactly 3 decades, I was the silent, obedient financial anchor for an utterly ungrateful family. The air outside our massive estate in Lake Forest, Chicago, was freezing, with thick snow piling up against the tall glass windows of the grand foyer. Inside the house, the emotional temperature felt even colder. I stood in absolute silence at the foot of my bed, carefully folding a few dark sweaters and placing them into a small overnight travel bag. The sprawling property, with its high ceilings and pristine hardwood floors, was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it had become the stage for my ultimate humiliation. My mother, Genevieve, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She was 78 years old, a woman who wore her arrogance like a heavy winter coat. She watched me pack with an expression of profound disgust. There was absolutely no warmth in her eyes. Standing right beside her was my younger brother, Vance. He was 48 years old, a severely mediocre vice president at a prestigious investment firm called Sterling Partners, and he possessed the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life. Vance reached into his tailored suit pocket, pulled out a flimsy plastic prepaid card, and tossed it onto my mattress. It landed with a pathetic thud. "Take that and disappear," Vance commanded, his voice dripping with sheer condescension. "It has $300 on it. Find a quiet motel somewhere off the highway and stay there until Christmas is over. Do not call our mother. Do not show your face. My father-in-law, Thaddeus, is flying in tonight. He holds my entire future in the palm of his hand, and I cannot afford to have you walking around like a pathetic charity case. You simply do not fit the image I need to project." I stopped folding my sweater and looked up at them. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain completely blank. I slipped the cheap card into my pocket. I zipped up my heavy bag. "I understand completely," I said. My voice was icy and flat. Genevieve let out a long sigh of immense relief, clearly believing her harsh words had put me right back into my submissive place. She firmly believed my silent departure was the ultimate sign of absolute defeat. I pulled open the heavy oak front door and walked out into the violent snowstorm. I did not shed a single tear. I did not look back. They genuinely thought they had just banished a helpless, socially awkward failure into the freezing night. Little did they know, they had just unlocked the cage of a predator. I did not walk toward the bus stop. Just 2 blocks away from the pristine estate, a sleek black luxury SUV sat idling quietly against the snowy curb. The private driver immediately stepped out into the freezing wind, opening the rear door for me with practiced efficiency. I slid into the heated leather interior, shutting the bitter cold out completely. "Take me to the Waldorf Astoria," I instructed. As the heavy vehicle pulled away, I leaned back against the plush seats and let the memories wash over me. 5 years ago, my family was completely bankrupt. Vance had made a series of catastrophic investments trying to keep up with his wealthy wife, Cordelia. The bank was days away from foreclosing on the family estate. My mother had wept on my shoulder, terrified of losing her elite social status. And, because I desperately craved my mother's love, I saved them. I never told them about the massive wealth I had accumulated. Instead, I quietly arranged for a blind corporate trust to purchase the estate entirely in cash. I structured the paperwork so that my corporate entity retained absolute ownership, but I allowed Vance to be listed as the authorized occupant. I essentially bought the house and handed him the keys, letting him play the role of the wealthy king to impress his arrogant in-laws. For 5 years, I shrunk my entire existence to ensure his fragile ego had enough room to expand. But the era of my silent accommodation was officially over. I arrived at the Waldorf Astoria and bypassed the standard reception desk, walking directly to the private concierge. I handed them my heavy matte black titanium card. Within minutes, I was whisked up to the top-floor presidential suite. The sprawling room featured panoramic views of the snowy Chicago skyline and a roaring marble fireplace. I walked over to the velvet sofa, unzipped my bag, and pulled out my highly encrypted silver laptop. I opened the security interface application. A grid of high-definition video feeds instantly popped up on my screen, displaying every major room of the Lake Forest estate in crystal-clear color. I had covertly installed these cameras 6 months ago to monitor my elderly mother's health while I traveled. Now, they were my perfect eyes and ears. On the glowing screen, I watched the heavy front door open. Thaddeus Sterling walked into the warm foyer, brushing snowflakes from his expensive overcoat. He was a ruthless, domineering man who controlled his investment firm with an iron fist. His daughter, Cordelia, followed closely behind, carrying shopping bags from designer boutiques. My mother and my brother rushed forward to greet them, overflowing with sickening, sycophantic joy. They ushered their wealthy guests into the grand living room, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing on a stage I entirely controlled. Vance popped the cork on a bottle of vintage champagne that I had personally purchased and stored in the cellar. He poured generous glasses for everyone, completely ignoring Cordelia's older brother, Silas, who had quietly entered the room and taken a seat in the corner. Silas was a quiet, observant man and the only person in that wretched family who had ever treated me with basic human decency. It is an absolute breath of fresh air walking into this house and not seeing Stella moping around like a depressed servant, Cordelia announced, taking a sip of my expensive champagne. That woman brings the entire property value down just by breathing. My mother laughed, a cruel, grating sound that echoed through the hidden microphones. I finally made her leave, Genevieve bragged loudly. Vance is preparing the legal paperwork to formally cut her out of the family trust next month. We are finally getting rid of the dead weight. I sat perfectly still in my luxurious suite, my heart turning to solid ice. They were drinking my wine, sitting on a custom sofa I had paid for, basking in the warmth of a luxury home that my hidden empire had fully funded. And they were actively celebrating my destruction. Suddenly, my private cell phone vibrated on the glass table. I looked down. It was a text message from Silas. He had sent it secretly from his corner chair in the living room. "I am so sorry, Stella," the message read. "They're throwing your belongings into heavy garbage bags right now. Do you need me to find you a lawyer?" A cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. I tapped the glass screen of my phone with surgical precision. "Just grab some popcorn and watch the show, Silas," I replied. I minimized the camera feeds and opened my encrypted corporate dashboard. I was no longer an obedient daughter. I was the anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Corp, a massive cybersecurity and artificial intelligence juggernaut currently valued at $1.5 billion. For decades, I had operated entirely in the shadows, building a digital empire while my family mocked my modest clothing and my quiet late nights. And currently, the entire financial world was frothing at the mouth because Aegis Corp was officially preparing for its initial public offering. I opened my secure email client. Sitting at the very top of the inbox was a desperate, aggressive pitch deck from Sterling Partners. Thaddeus Sterling was practically begging my proxy board for the exclusive right to underwrite the Aegis Corp public offering. His investment firm was quietly failing, and securing my billion-dollar account was the only way he could save his crumbling legacy. He had promised Vance an immediate promotion to senior partner if Vance could somehow help secure the mysterious Aegis Corp account. My encrypted satellite phone suddenly rang. It was the chairman of the National Technology Innovator Awards. "Stella," the chairman said, his voice laced with frantic excitement. "The global media anticipation for your public offering is reaching an absolute fever pitch. We need you to step out of the shadows. I am personally asking you to attend the gala tomorrow night on Christmas Eve and accept the Innovator of the Decade Award on live national television." I stared down at the icy city streets far below my window. The alignment of fate was so flawlessly destructive it almost took my breath away. Thaddeus and Vance were desperately trying to court a billionaire they had never met. They had thrown me out into the snow to make their home look perfect for the holidays. "I accept," I told the chairman. My voice was dangerously smooth. "You will have the face of Aegis Core tomorrow night." I ended the call and immediately opened a secure video link to my primary wealth manager in Geneva. The time for silent accommodation had passed. "Execute a complete financial lockdown on the Chicago domestic accounts," I commanded, my tone devoid of any warmth. "Drain the balances of the checking and savings accounts back into the primary corporate holding fund. Cancel every single platinum credit line tied to my corporate guarantor. Leave Vance with exactly what his mediocre paycheck deposited over the past 30 days. The keystrokes echoed sharply through the audio feed. "What about the real estate assets?" my wealth manager asked. "Revoke his authorized occupant status," I instructed, staring at the digital property files on my monitor. "Transfer the property assignment entirely back to the absolute control of the proxy board. He no longer has any right to reside on those premises. Schedule the physical enforcement for Christmas morning." "Everything is locked and secured," the manager confirmed. He stands on thin air. The trap was fully set. The steel jaws were wide open. The following evening was Christmas Eve. Inside the warm, lavishly decorated living room of my estate, the atmosphere was thick with arrogant anticipation. On my tablet screen, I watched Thaddeus Sterling pace in front of the massive stone fireplace. He raised a hand, commanding absolute silence from the room. "Turn on the television," Thaddeus ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Put it on the CNBC Financial Network immediately. The anonymous founder of Aegis Core is stepping out of the shadows tonight. I want you analyzing her every single move, Vance. If you want that senior partner office, you need to understand how real, untouchable billionaires operate. You need to manipulate her exactly how you manipulate your pathetic sister." Vance eagerly grabbed the remote control and turned the television on. He sat on the absolute edge of the armchair, puffing out his chest, completely ready to dissect the psychology of the brilliant woman he planned to conquer. Cordelia and my mother leaned in closely from the plush sofa, their faces flushed with the thrill of proximity to such massive wealth. They were eagerly drinking my vintage wine, sitting in the luxurious comfort of my home, totally convinced that their brilliant golden child was about to secure the ultimate corporate victory. Miles away, I stepped out of my limousine and walked into the Grand Convention Center. I wore a custom emerald silk gown that clung to my frame like impenetrable armor. Heavy diamonds rested against my collarbone, catching the blinding glare of 100 flashing cameras. I walked with lethal, unbothered grace, completely ignoring the frantic journalists screaming my name. On the television screen inside my living room, the host stood at the crystal podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host declared loudly, "it is my absolute honor to present the grand prize to the brilliant anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Core. Please welcome Stella." The television camera panned swiftly across the sea of standing ovations, cutting through the crowded auditorium before locking directly onto me. I stepped out from the heavy velvet curtains, projecting a ruthless, terrifying authority. Inside the Lake Forest estate, the festive, arrogant atmosphere died in a fraction of a second. Total, deafening silence descended upon the room. My mother, who had been holding a small porcelain appetizer plate, let out a sharp, breathless gasp. The expensive porcelain slipped from her trembling fingers and exploded into a million jagged pieces on the hardwood floor. Vance stopped breathing entirely. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. The crystal wine glass he was holding slipped right through his numb fingers, shattering violently and splashing dark red wine across his tailored trousers. "No," Vance stammered, his voice barely a choked whisper. "That is impossible." He stared at the massive screen, his mind completely failing to process the catastrophic reality unfolding before his eyes. He was looking directly at the woman he had banished to a cheap motel with a $300 prepaid card just 24 hours ago. He was staring at the billionaire titan holding the massive keys to the empire his boss was desperately begging to represent. Cordelia sat completely paralyzed on the sofa. The smug, arrogant smirk she had worn all evening had been wiped away entirely. She realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that her husband did not own a single piece of this elite existence. She had attached herself to a complete fraud. But the most terrifying reaction came from Thaddeus. The powerful executive stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the television screen. His sharp mind rapidly processed the undeniable truth. His ambitious vice president had not just lied about his personal wealth. Vance had actively insulted and humiliated the anonymous founder of Aegis Corp on the very eve of their massive corporate pitch. The blood rushed to Thaddeus's face as the pieces violently clicked together. On the screen, I reached the crystal podium. I looked straight into the primary camera lens, my eyes burning with cold, calculated vengeance. As we prepared to take Aegis Corp public, I announced, my voice slicing through the quiet auditorium with razor-sharp clarity. "We have been evaluating the partnerships that will guide us into this next chapter. An initial public offering of this magnitude requires an absolute alignment of principles. We demand uncompromising transparency and relentless fiduciary integrity." I paused, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. I wanted to ensure that every single viewer across the nation was paying absolute attention. Which is why Aegis Corp is officially and publicly rejecting the underwriting bid from Sterling Partners, I declared. A collective, deafening gasp erupted across the grand auditorium. The financial journalists immediately started frantically typing on their devices. Publicly rejecting a major investment firm on live national television was entirely unprecedented. It was a brutal, catastrophic blow to the firm's reputation. But I was not finished. "We refuse to do business with a firm whose executives lack basic moral integrity," I continued, driving the final nail directly into their coffin. "We will not partner with men who commit corporate fraud, who lie about their personal assets, and who banish their own flesh and blood into the freezing snow on Christmas Eve just to maintain a pathetic illusion of wealth." I stared deeply into the camera lens, ensuring my family felt the full, crushing weight of my gaze. "Merry Christmas, Mother." "Merry Christmas, Vance." The auditorium exploded into absolute chaos. The sheer magnitude of the public execution sent shockwaves through the entire financial industry. Inside the living room, the psychological devastation was absolute. Thaddeus Sterling moved like a furious predator. He charged forward and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap directly across Vance's face. The sharp cracking sound echoed like a gunshot. "You absolute incompetent fool." Thaddeus roared, grabbing Vance by the collar of his stained sweater. "You just destroyed my entire firm on national television. You brought me into a luxury house paid for by a billionaire and bragged about your superior intellect. Our reputation is completely obliterated." "Please, Thaddeus, I can explain," Vance begged, weeping openly as he scrambled backward into the shattered glass. "I had no idea it was her." "You are fired," Thaddeus screamed, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You are stripped of your title, your salary, and your corporate standing. You will never work in the financial sector again. I will personally make sure you face federal charges for estate fraud." Cordelia stood up slowly. She looked at the sobbing, pathetic man cowering on the floor. She pulled her expensive diamond wedding ring off her finger and threw it directly at his chest. "Do not ever contact me again, you penniless fraud," Cordelia sneered. She grabbed her designer coat and followed her furious father out the front door, slamming it shut behind them. Silas simply stood up, offered a slow, mocking round of applause, and walked out into the night, leaving my mother and brother to choke on the bitter ashes of their ruined lives. Christmas morning broke over the Chicago suburbs with a blinding, pristine brightness. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a series of heavy, authoritative knocks rattled the thick oak front door of the estate. Vance pulled the door open, his eyes completely bloodshot from a sleepless night of panic. He found himself staring directly into the stern, uncompromising faces of 2 armed county sheriff deputies, flanked by a team of private security contractors dressed in tactical black. "We are here to execute a court-ordered eviction on behalf of the Aegis Corps Corporate Trust," the lead deputy stated coldly, holding up a heavy judicial mandate. "You and all other occupants are required to vacate these premises immediately. You do not have the legal jurisdiction to do this." Vance shouted, his arrogant delusion flaring up one final time. "I live here. I am the primary resident." The deputy remained entirely unmoved. He handed the official federal warrant directly to Vance. "You are legally classified as an unauthorized occupant," the deputy explained. "The primary shareholder revoked your guest privileges late last night. You have exactly 10 minutes to exit the property, or you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespassing." Genevieve rushed into the foyer, her face pale with absolute terror. She clutched her silk robe tightly around her neck. "You cannot throw us out into the snow," Genevieve shrieked. "We have nowhere to go." Vance frantically pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he opened his banking application, desperately trying to book a luxury hotel suite. The screen loaded, displaying a bold, glaring error message. "Account frozen. Available balance is $0." He swiped frantically to his credit cards. Every single platinum account was marked with a bright red suspended status. The financial lockdown was absolute. The security team moved into the house with ruthless efficiency. They systematically directed Vance and my weeping mother out of the warm foyer and directly onto the freezing, snow-covered front porch. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a definitive, final thud, locking automatically behind them. They stood shivering in the bitter wind, completely stripped of their fake wealth, their unearned status, and their arrogant dignity. They were homeless, penniless, and entirely isolated on Christmas morning. Half a block down the street, I sat comfortably in the heated leather interior of my sleek black SUV. The tinted windows shielded me entirely from their view, but I had a perfect, unobstructed sight line to their absolute misery. I watched the golden child and the cruel mother shivering uncontrollably in the snow. A genuine, radiant smile touched my lips. I tapped the privacy glass and my driver pulled the heavy vehicle smoothly away from the curb, leaving the toxic wreckage of my past permanently in the rearview mirror. 1 year later, I am sitting on the sun-drenched balcony of my private island, overseeing a global tech empire that continues to shatter records. I have a profound sense of peace and absolute freedom that no amount of their fake upper-class prestige could ever buy. Meanwhile, Vance is currently working the night shift at a discount retail store, living in a cramped studio apartment with a mother who constantly berates him for losing their luxurious lifestyle. The story of my silent but absolute triumph serves as a profound reminder. Never shrink yourself to accommodate the fragile egos of people who view your presence as a liability. True power lies in self-reliance and the absolute refusal to let toxic family members dictate your worth. Justice is often simply the natural consequence of removing your protective shielding from those who take you for granted. We owe absolutely no loyalty to people who actively exploit our sacrifices. Walking away from a toxic environment is never a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate display of sheer, undeniable strength. If you are currently compromising your brilliance to keep the peace in a toxic relationship, take back your power today and start building the spectacular future you truly deserve. What is one boundary you have set to protect your own peace this year? Let me know down in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own incredible strength. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.